Okay, imagine this. A compound, one that's mostly been linked with uh, altering consciousness, maybe even counterculture stuff. What if that same compound could actually be a key to living a longer, healthier life?
Right. It sounds almost like science fiction.
Totally. But today, we're doing a deep dive into some really surprising new research that's suggesting exactly that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating turn. So our mission here is to really unpack these findings. They come from an article on Study Finds looking at research out of Emory University. Dr. Louise Hecker led the team. We're going to explore how this substance, known for, well, very different things, might actually be what they call a geroprotective agent.
Geroprotective, meaning it protects against aging itself.
Exactly. Something that could actually slow down the aging process.
So this isn't just, finding another supplement. It's potentially rethinking health, vitality, maybe even what we consider medicine. Let's get into it and see what the science says.
Well, typically when you mention psilocybin, people immediately think, okay, mental health, depression, anxiety treatment.
Right, that's where most of the focus has been. And for good reason, the results there look pretty promising.
Definitely. But this new study, it was published in NPJ Aging, and it adds this completely different angle, a really groundbreaking twist, actually. It's suggesting the compound doesn't just work on the brain, it might literally act as like we said, a geroprotective agent.
And this isn't just theory anymore.
No, this is the first real experimental evidence showing psilocybin might slow aging right down at the cellular level.
Okay, that's huge. But how did they even start looking in this direction? What was the spark for this?
It's actually a pretty interesting origin story. Dr. Hecker, the lead researcher, she used to be an associate professor at Emory. She apparently knew basically nothing about psilocybin at first.
Really? So how did she get involved?
It came up in a casual chat, believe it or not, with a workout buddy. They were talking about something called the psilocybin telomere hypothesis.
The psilocybin telomere hypothesis. Okay, break that down for us. What are telomeres again, and what's the proposed link?
Sure. So telomeres are like little protective caps on the ends of our chromosomes. Think of the plastic tips on shoelaces. They keep the DNA stable. They naturally get shorter as our cells divide and age. And their length is linked not just to aging, but potentially even to our psychological state.
Ah, done.
And this hypothesis suggested maybe psilocybin works across different conditions, including mental health, partly because it affects telomere length. Dr. Hecker heard this and thought, wait a minute, that's something I can actually test.
And so she did. Starting small, I guess.
Yeah.
In the lab.
Exactly. They started with human lung fibroblast cells in the lab. These are cells that naturally age and eventually stop dividing, so they're a good model for studying aging.
What did they see when they introduced psilocybin, or rather its active form?
Right. They used psilocin, which is what your body converts psilocybin into. And the results were pretty remarkable. Psilocin actually extended the lifespan of these cells.
Extended it by how much?
At what they considered a moderate dose, about 10 micromolar concentration, the cells lived around 29% longer.
29%. Okay, that's significant.
But then at a higher dose, 100 micromolar, it was even more impressive, a 57% longer lifespan for the cell.
Wow, 57%. That's a big jump. But were the cells still, healthy? Were just kind of artificially kept alive? Was there any risk of them going rogue, becoming cancerous?
That's the really crucial part. No, they weren't just hanging on. They stayed healthy. They kept dividing normally, functioning as they should. And importantly, they did not turn cancerous. They just seemed to age more slowly before eventually stopping division naturally, which is called senescence. Healthy senescence.
Okay, that's a critical distinction. So proving it in a dish is one thing. The next step had to be moving to a living system, right?
Yeah.
Did they test this in animals?
They did. They moved on to mice, specifically 19-month-old female mice.
19 months old. What does that translate to in human years, roughly?
It's about equivalent to humans in their early to mid-60s, so an age where you'd really want an anti-aging intervention to show some effect.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And how did the experiment work?
These mice got either psilocybin or a placebo once a month for a total of 10 months. They started with a lower dose, 5 milligrams per kilogram, for the first month. Then, for the next 9 months, they upped it to 15 milligrams per kilogram.
All right, 10 months of treatment. What happened? Did the cellular results translate?
They really did seem to. By the end of the study, 80% of the mice that got the psilocybin were still alive.
80%, compared to the placebo group.
Compared to only 50% in the placebo group. So that works out to a 60% improvement in survival rate.
A 60% improvement. That's substantial. Was it just about living longer, or did they notice anything else?
That's another interesting part. It wasn't just survival stats. The researchers observed visible improvements too. The treated mice apparently had better fur quality.
Better fur? Like how?
Yeah, like new hair growth and less graying compared to the control mice. Dr. Hecker even mentioned she was surprised, saying the treated mice just looked healthier.
Huh. Like they were having better hair days consistently.
Something like that. It adds a sort of visual confirmation to the survival data.
Okay, so we have longer living cells, longer living mice that even look better. How is this happening? If it's not just a psychedelic effect, what's the biological mechanism behind this apparent anti-aging effect?
Well, the current thinking centers on how psilocybin interacts with serotonin receptors, specifically one called the 5-HT2A receptor.
Serotonin receptors. I usually associate those mainly with the brain.
That's the key thing. They are in the brain, which explains the mental effects. But these 5-HT2A receptors, they're actually found all over the body. We're talking fibroblasts, the skin cells they tested, but also neurons, heart cells, immune cells, the cells lining our blood vessels. They're quite widespread.
Ah, okay. So because these receptors are basically everywhere, activating them with psilocybin could have effects throughout the entire system, not just in the head.
Precisely. And activating these receptors seems to kick off a chain reaction of beneficial changes inside the cells. One major effect is an increase in levels of SIRT1.
SIRT1. What does that do?
It's a really important protein. Think of it like a master regulator for cellular health. It's involved in controlling aging processes, metabolism, how cells respond to stress. It's crucial for vitality.
Okay, so more SIRT1 is generally good. What else happens?
It also seems to reduce oxidative stress. That's the damage caused by unstable molecules called free radicals, a major driver of aging. And circling back to where this started, it appears to help preserve telomeres, those protective chromosome caps we talked about earlier.
Right, the telomere hypothesis connection.
Exactly. So it's hitting multiple key pathways involved in aging.
So it's not like targeting one specific problem area. It sounds more like a broad systemic effect, boosting the cell's fundamental ability to cope with aging.
That seems to be the idea. It's less about treating a specific disease of aging and more about potentially slowing down the underlying processes that make us vulnerable to those diseases in the first place.
And that wider effect might also help explain why it seems beneficial for so many different conditions, including the mental health aspects. It's all potentially connected at this basic cellular level.
That's a plausible link, yeah. Strengthening that fundamental resilience.
Now, these results are, frankly, pretty stunning. But we have to pump the brakes a little. This is still early stage, right? What are the big unanswered questions before we could even think about this for humans?
Oh, absolutely. Lots of questions. A really big one is that the mouse study only used females. We just don't know if males would respond the same way. That needs testing.
Okay, that's a significant gap. What else?
Well, there's the whole issue of dosing. What's the optimal dose for anti-aging? How often would someone need it? When should treatment start middle age? Later? And critically, what are the long-term safety implications of taking psilocybin repeatedly, maybe for years, specifically for this purpose?
Right. And wasn't there a theoretical concern about cancer risk if you slow down cell aging too much? Did they see any sign of that?
That's always a background concern with things that affect cell lifespan. But importantly, in this study, both in the cells and presumably in the mice, they didn't find evidence of that. The cells aged slower, but still stopped dividing naturally. They didn't become immortal or cancerous, but it's something researchers will need to keep a very close eye on in any future studies.
Definitely. And then there's the huge practical hurdle.
Right.
The legal status.
Yeah, the elephant in the room. Psilocybin is a Schedule I controlled substance in the U.S. That makes research incredibly difficult and slow.
So even getting approval to do the necessary human studies for anti-aging is a major challenge.
A massive challenge. You know, the doses they used in the mice were sort of extrapolated from doses used in clinical trials for other things like depression. We don't even know if those are the right doses for aging, but finding out requires navigating significant regulatory barriers.
Still, despite all that, Dr. Hecker sounds pretty hopeful about it eventually translating to humans.
She does seem optimistic. She points to, I think the quote was, a plethora of positive clinical outcomes from over 150 trials for other conditions.
Yeah.
And she also mentioned that those trials, even including older adults, have generally suggested psilocybin is quite safe when administered carefully in a clinical setting.
So the safety profile, at least in those contexts, looks encouraging.
Reasonably encouraging, yes. But she also emphasized the need for more research funding, particularly pushing for federal recognition and support, since a lot of the current work relies on private funding due to the legal status.
Right. If this pans out, though,
Hmm.
it really could be a paradigm shift, couldn't it?
Absolutely. Imagine moving away from just treating individual age-related diseases, heart disease, dementia, arthritis, whatever, one by one after they appear, and instead potentially having something that slows down the fundamental aging process that underlies all of them. It would open up a whole new frontier for extending not just lifespan, but health span, the years of healthy, vital life.
From repair to prevention, really, at the most basic level.
Oh.
Okay, so wrapping this up, this deep dive has taken us into some unexpected territory. We've looked at how psilocybin, the compound in magic mushrooms, is showing this surprising potential as a geroprotective agent.
Yeah, we saw the evidence from the lab extending cell lifespan quite dramatically.
And then in older mice, improving survival rate significantly, even making them look healthier.
All seemingly linked to fundamental aging mechanisms involving serotonin receptors, SART1, oxidative stress, and telomeres.
It really does make you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're still learning about biology and the compounds found in nature.
Mm-hmm. What else might be out there? What other substances, maybe ones we've overlooked or even dismissed as controversial, could hold keys to health and longevity that we haven't unlocked yet?
It certainly challenges assumptions. It makes you, the listener, maybe reconsider what you assume is medicine and what isn't. Perhaps some of those lines aren't as clear-cut as we thought.